Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Another month and another set of strange and interesting, all at the same time, set of rankings from the WBO. The interesting part, well, it's Dillian Whyte up to number one spot. The strange and uber strange part of it, Richard Lahi entering at number 13. He's the holder of the WBO African title, or interim holder of that title. And that's where I'm going to start first, because his inclusion, it is a bit strange given the breadth of his work. But also, some of his background here is very bizarre. And that name, Richard Lahi, it might ring a bell. You may know him as Richard Lahi, Harrison Lahi, Richard Harrison Lahi. And when I was looking for him, because there's not much online about him, his promoters send you to this page, like the page of our WBO African heavyweight champ, Richard Harrison Lahi. But then the name there, Richard Digriat. You go to the page, it is clearly Richard Lahi, and he's operating under another name. I mean, what is all that about? Seriously, what is all that about? It's already confusing enough that he's got these multiple, shortened and lengthened names. You go to his promoter's page, and it's dealing you off to someone called Richard Digriat. I just don't know what to make of that. But Richard Lahi, or Richard Digriat, Richard Lahi Harrison, whatever name he's going by, he's best known for being a bit of a serial ducker, because he was, earlier this year, he was meant to face Junior Farr. Pulled out of that fight relatively late notice, and no real explanation. But then he pops up as having signed to fight Joe Joyce. But then he pulls out of that fight at really, really late notice. They had to scramble to replace him. They eventually signed Avika Bakurin at about 24 hours notice. But there was no explanation of the pullout there. So then later in 2018 in August, he had a fight for the World Boxing Organization African heavyweight title, the interim version of that. God knows what's happened to the actual version of that. This guy here, Boniface Kabore, who he fought, that wasn't even the listed opponent that he was meant to fight. This guy came in an extremely late notice. So, yeah, this whole situation, it's a bit strange. So, Richard Lahi, he's been campaigning mostly in Ghana. He's got a 13-1 record. The one loss came the one time he fought outside of Ghana to a guy called Ergen Merson. And I think from memory, that guy hasn't fought since. He hasn't fought since. So, yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with that. He must have been injured or something or whatever. He's just walked away from boxing, but he beat Richard Lahi, and that was enough for him. He retired. This whole situation with Richard Lahi, Richard Lahi, Harrison Lahi, Richard Harrison Lahi, and even Richard Digriat, I mean, I just don't know what to make of it. But, yes, very strange indeed. And actually, Richard Lahi, his sort of inclusion reminds me a little bit of the inclusion of Christopher Lovejoy. And if you just indulge me here for a second. So I've just gone to my Twitter here. So that situation with Richard Lahi entering the rankings, it reminds me of Christopher Lovejoy, WBA sensation Christopher Lovejoy, entering at 15, basically fighting in obscurity, fighting guys that no one's really ever heard of, and then getting ranked, because Christopher Lovejoy's been fighting out of Tijuana, Mexico. See, I've called him here the Tijuana Tomahawk, getting mostly first-round KOs. He's had another fight or two since he's entered the WBA rankings. I believe he's 16-0. So I reported the other day on Twitter, because I'd been on Lovejoy's Instagram feed, which bizarrely there used to be, it must have been 100 posts or so, maybe even more, but now they've all been deleted and there's only a couple. But one of the new posts that went up said Joseph Parker didn't want it, so we're going after Dillian Whyte. So with that in mind, I had tagged Joseph Parker in the actual post, and Parker, he responded to it. So I'll just bring this up. And Joseph Parker said, "Who is he?" And actually, Dillian Whyte, he also responded saying, "I don't know, I just blocked him, ain't got the time for vegetables, bro." So Richard Lahi, this whole sort of who is he question, it just reminded me of Christopher Lovejoy and these guys who are making big call-outs, except that with Richard Lahi's case, he doesn't really have a presence on social media, from what I can tell. There's no real articles that have been written about him, but even as we can see from this one here, this Facebook page that is set up for him, it's not even under the Richard Lahi name, it's under someone else, Richard Degriat. So, this whole thing is very bizarre, I've got to say. Anyway, that was kind of diverted there, but we'll get back to the list proper. But I just wanted to raise that example of Lahi because there's all these farcical rankings, and you just got to wonder what is going on. And that guy is best known for ducking Junior Farr and then latterly Joe Joyce. His record, very thin. There is not much there. Not much. Oh, that's not actually his record. That's the guy that he fought. Ergen Mensah, who never fought after beating Lahi. But Lahi's record here, it's thin. Very thin. There's quite a few unanimous decisions against guys that, complete cans. But anyway, let's get back to the rankings. So, Dillian Whyte, he's at number 1 in the WBO rankings. So that's very interesting for me because obviously they're lining up Anthony Joshua to fight someone for April, and Dillian Whyte has been listed as a bit of a potential favourite for that should Anthony Joshua not face Deontay Wilder. No guarantees they make that fight. So Dillian Whyte pretty much next cab off the rank. Eddie Hearn has confirmed this. Also what we're hearing, WBO is likely to order its mandatory next before the IBF. There's a bit of a rotation, and we've had a bit of confirmation in the past couple of days that the WBO is next. With Dillian Whyte being in the top spot, well, it certainly increases the likelihood that he is named the mandatory challenger. WBO convention is going to be on, so who knows, it could happen this week. Okay, we've got Bryant Jennings at number 2. He's up one spot from 3. I'd note before I go on, so Alexander Povetkin was previously in the top spot, so he's further down the rankings now. We'll get to him shortly. So Bryant Jennings, he will obviously be wanting a big fight in the WBO. I'm sure that Top Rank will be wanting to push for some sort of final eliminator with Dillian Whyte. Number 3, Tom Schwartz. We've got number 4, Jarrell Miller. Number 5, number 6, we have Zhili Zhang and Kyotaro Fujimoto. I covered these guys in my last rankings in terms of that very inflated positions for those two based on the level of opposition that they've been facing. So we've got, actually, Zhang is going to be facing Alexander Ustinov in Monaco on November 24th, I believe. So that is a step up of sorts for Zhili Zhang. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes in that one, because if he's got anything about him, he will beat Ustinov, who is, 41 now. Didn't look good against Manuel Char a year ago, and Ustinov hasn't been in the ring since. So if Zhang's got anything about him, he needs to get through that fight and look good. And one of the potential, upsides of looking good is he can start to build a bit of a profile for himself. He can go from being a prospect to fringe contender, because right now we don't know how good he is because he hasn't been facing very good opposition. Largely he's been fighting in the United States. He's under the Rock Nation banner. But, some of the fights that he's had, most recently Don Hainsworth, he shouldn't be at that level. He should be actually aiming higher. And it's good to see him in with someone that, is going to give him, a few challenges. So Zhang, a 6'6" southpaw, will face the 6'7.5" Ustinov. I'm looking forward to that fight. And at 6, as I mentioned, we've got Kyotaro Fujimoto, who recently fought another blown-up former middleweight. He's got the Asia-Pacific belt, so he's maintaining this inflated ranking, facing Neville Nobody, so he needs to really step up. He's got one loss on his record, and that was to Solomon Himono. And Solomon Himono, he is just, he's really journeyman level now. He was never much more than a gatekeeper anyway. Number 7, we've got Tyrone Spong. He's got the Latino belt. He picked that up a couple of months ago. Ajit Kabayal, he and Otto Wallen, who's at 9. They look like they're going to be fighting. A purse bid has been called. And at 10, we have Junior Farr. He has the Oriental International title. He's recently had a fight scheduled for December 15th against a Argentine who's a former cruiserweight, a guy who's 6'6.5". So, yeah, he's quite a slender guy, this guy that Farr will be facing in December. His name escapes me, Rogelio someone. Number 11, Derek Chisora. He's obviously looking to fight Dillian Whyte in December. And number 12, Ali Aaron Demirezian, another guy that a lot of people wouldn't have seen fight, but he is going to be having a fight with Izu Agono in Poland. That is for the WBO Europe title. That's on December the 8th. So that will be a good fight, one, to see where Demiretion's really at, but also to see where Ogono's really at. Ogono's only had a few rounds since he lost to Dominic Breazeale at the start of 2017. God knows where Izu Ogono is at. But he obviously has been accused of having poor stamina, being a bit muscle-bound, and he does, from what I can tell, from some of the training footage that he posts on social media, he is cutting a bit of a leaner figure these days than he once did, just in terms of the muscle mass. He's never really had any fat on him, but in terms of the muscle mass, he looks like he's sort of dialed it back just a little bit. Then obviously we've got this sort of strange inclusion of Richard Lahi at number 13. At 14, Filip Hrgović, so he recently beat Amir Mansour. They've got him listed as holding a vacant belt, or I don't know what that's about. He's actually a fighter out of Croatia, so maybe that's just an error. I mean, these things do happen. And at number 15, Alexander Povetkin, he tumbles all the way from 1st to 15th. And that's obviously after losing to Anthony Joshua back on September the 22nd. But he's indicated he will be working with Matchroom again, and he will be fighting in the United Kingdom, in London, in April. So, you have to assume that it is going to be on that undercard. I'm sure he wouldn't be fighting at the York Hall or somewhere else, or the Copper Box. But in terms of these rankings, there's a couple of things that you just have to wonder. It'd be good to see Tom Schwartz in a fight. He's at number 3. It'd be good to see Kyotaro Fujimoto in a proper fight. And it's good to see that Kabayel and Wallen look like they're going to fight. They do hold different European titles, so, that's effectively unifying a couple of different titles. Not WBO titles, but different ones. Obviously, the Ali Aaron Demiration is going to be taking a step up. He'll be fighting Izu Ogono in December. I'm glad to see that. Filip Hrgović, I think he deserves to be ranked on the basis of his recent win over Mansour. Richard Lahi, I mean, that's just bizarre, whatever his name actually is. Povetkin, he's probably a little bit unlucky to drop all the way to the tail end of the rankings, but it kind of is what it is. That just happens. But Dillian Whyte topping the rankings for this month. Bryant Jennings, he's obviously on the rise as well. Be interesting to see who they line him up for next. Maybe we'll hear something after this WBO conference. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, or follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.